The wind howled like a hungry wolf across the empty Wyoming plains, tearing at the last warmth of the dying sun and sweeping snow over everything it touched. The land was white and endless, cruel and silent, the kind of silence that pressed against a man's bones. Eli Beckett, a rugged rancher with tired eyes, rode slowly across the frozen ground. His horse, Jupiter, trudged through the deepening snow, steam rising from its nostrils like smoke from a dying fire. Eli was headed home after fixing a broken fence, hoping to make it back before night swallowed the world whole. But fate had other plans. A strange shape caught his eye near the half-frozen creek. At first, he thought it was a dead animal, maybe a calf or a coyote. But something about the way it lay, too still, too human, made his pulse quicken. A dark piece of fabric lifted in the wind. It looked like a dress. He could have ignored it, ridden on, and pretended he never saw it. Maybe he should have. Trouble was easy to find in the West, and harder still to leave behind. But something inside him, a memory of his sister Sarah, the one he couldn't save, wouldn't let him leave. He rode slowly toward the shape and dismounted. The snow crunched under his boots as he knelt beside her, a young woman, lying face down in the snow. Her skin was pale and tinted blue, her hair tangled with frost. Her dress, heavy and soaked through, clung to her small frame like a shroud. He touched her shoulder, expecting the cold stiffness of death, but her body moved. A faint breath escaped her cracked lips, barely visible in the freezing air. She was alive, but only just. With a curse, Eli stripped off his sheepskin coat and wrapped her in it, ignoring the icy wind that slapped his skin. He lifted her gently onto Jupiter, her body limp and light as a bird. She moaned softly, a sound filled with pain and fear. Eli held her close, rode hard, and did not stop until the glow of his cabin filled the darkness. Inside, he laid her on his bed near a small fire. He pulled off her frozen boots, her skin icy like river rocks. He reached for the buttons of her dress, wet and freezing, but her eyes flew open, filled with wild fear. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No," she whispered, her voice thin and broken. He stopped. He didn't understand why a woman on death's door would be afraid of a man taking off a soaked dress. But the terror in her eyes reminded him of his sister, and something in him softened. He let her be. He wrapped her in dry blankets, made broth over the fire, and sat through the night beside her, listening to the fragile sound of her breathing. For 3 days she was lost in fever, crying out in her sleep, clutching the strange dress in her fists as if her life depended on it. He never left her side. On the 4th day, she woke. She stared at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, heavy with loss. He told her his name, told her she was safe, and asked hers in return. It took a long moment before she whispered it, "Clara." She said nothing more. Weeks passed. She got stronger, but she never took off the dress. Even when it dried stiff and cold, she wore it like armor. Eli didn't ask why. He respected the space between them. He chopped wood, tended cattle, cooked meals, and tried to make the cabin feel like a refuge instead of a prison. Slowly, Clara began to move through the cabin, but always like a ghost, silently, watching him from corners, flinching at every sudden motion. But he was patient, speaking softly, reminding her every day that she was safe, even though he wasn't sure she believed him. One night, Eli woke to the sound of a scream. He found her in the corner, curled tight, shaking, eyes wide with terror, as if she was staring at a monster only she could see. He tried to come close, but she flinched like a broken animal, whispering something over and over. It took him a while to realize what she was saying. "Please don't take it off. Please don't take it off." The dress, the worn, shapeless, ugly dress. There was something terrible behind it, something worse than the cold and the wilderness. Eli stared at Clara trembling in the corner, and deeply, painfully he knew she wasn't just running from the winter. She was running from a man, someone who still owned a part of her, someone she was still terrified of, and somewhere out in the vast, unforgiving snow that someone might be looking for her. The storm hit without warning. Late one afternoon, the sky turned gray like old bruises, and by nightfall, the cabin was surrounded by a swirling wall of white so thick even the porch disappeared from view. The wind beat against the log walls like angry fists, and for 3 days, Eli and Clara were trapped inside the small cabin together. In that tight space, something began to change between them. At first, the silence was tense and stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. Clara moved quietly, avoiding Eli whenever she could, keeping her distance. But then, in the glow of the fire, in the warm smell of stew and wood smoke, the edges of her fear began to soften. On the second day, Eli told her a story, a simple one, about a stubborn bull that wouldn't stay fenced in, no matter what. He told it in his gruff, plain way, not trying to be funny. But something the way he described chasing that bull across half the prairie made Clara smile, and then laugh, a small, startled sound, like she had forgotten how. Eli froze mid-sentence, staring at her with surprise shining in his eyes. Clara covered her mouth, embarrassed, but the sound had already done its work. It broke something in the cabin, a wall of ice that had stood between them for too long. Later that night, Clara sat sewing by the fire while Eli cleaned his rifle. The silence was not empty anymore. It was comfortable, like two people sitting back to back in the same storm. It was then Clara asked something she had never dared before. "Why are you alone, Eli?" He paused, staring into the fire. She saw the sadness settle over him slowly like dust, and then he told her about his sister, Sarah. How she married a respected man who turned out to be cruel. How she tried to get help, but the town turned their backs. How she was found in a river, and how everyone called it an accident. His voice was full of a quiet, simmering rage, not at her, but at the world. He spoke with pain, not violence, and Clara felt something sharp and unspoken crack inside her. She put down her sewing and, with slow, cautious steps, reached out. She placed her hand gently over his. It was the first time she had touched him. He turned his hand over and held hers like it was something fragile, something precious. The firelight warmed their faces, and the storm outside roared, as if trying to break in. But in that little cabin, they had built a new world, small and warm. That night, Clara woke from a nightmare, her dress clutched in her fists, her voice hoarse from crying in her sleep. Eli knelt beside her, unsure if he should touch her, scared to break the trust she was beginning to give. She looked at him with eyes still wet from tears. "Please don't leave," she whispered. He didn't. He stayed through the night, sitting beside her, a silent protector as she slept, safe from shadows for the first time in a long time. Clara healed slowly. Her fever faded. Her nightmares came less often. One morning, she helped Eli chop wood, with hands still shaking from her past, but with a small, determined fire in her eyes. Eli saw strength where others would have only seen scars. But even on good days, Clara never took off the dress. She washed it in secret. She slept in it. It hung around her like a prison sentence, and Eli knew something was hidden deep within her soul. One afternoon, as she hung freshly washed clothes by the fire, the sleeve of her dress slipped. Eli's breath caught. Bruises, old and new. Finger-shaped marks around her wrist and forearm, right where someone had held her down. His blood turned to ice, then to fire. Clara flinched sharply and pulled the sleeve back, but the damage was done. Eli didn't ask. Not then. Not yet. He could feel the truth rising like a storm in his chest, but he held it back. That night, while she slept, a fever returned. Not from sickness, but from fear. She shivered uncontrollably, whispering things in her sleep. Fragments, names, screams, pleas. In the cold blue light before dawn, Eli realized it wasn't just the dress she was afraid of losing. It was the only armor she had left, and behind that cloth was a truth so terrible she would rather freeze, rather die than reveal it. The storm passed, but they both knew a new one was coming. And this one would not be made of snow, it would be made of men. The men Clara was running from, it would be made of a name. And when it came, Eli Beckett would have to decide who he was, a man who kept his promise, or a man who broke it. To save her life, the thaw came slow and reluctant. The snow pulled back from the earth in patches, retreating like a wounded animal. The creek began to murmur beneath its melting ice, and the world seemed to breathe again after months of suffocating silence. Clara was different now, stronger. She moved around the cabin not like a ghost, but like a survivor. Yet Eli could still see the shadow in her eyes, the fear of footsteps on fresh snow, the dread that every wind against the door might be him. The man she ran from. One night, Clara woke in a fever. Her body burned. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Eli did what he had always done, cooled her skin, held her hand, whispered calm into the storm that raged inside her. But this time, something was wrong. Her dress was soaked in sweat. It clung to her body like a wet, filthy bandage, trapping the heat, feeding the fever. Eli's heart pounded as he tried to help her, but she grabbed his wrist again, weak but desperate. "Don't," she breathed. "Please don't take it off." He had promised, but he also knew she was dying. Whether from fever or from fear, he didn't know. Either way, he couldn't let it happen. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. So he broke the promise. He slid his fingers under the buttons and gently, carefully, began to undo the dress. Clara tried to stop him, but she was too weak. Her tears soaked the blanket. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "This is the only way." When he peeled the heavy fabric away from her skin, he thought he was prepared. He wasn't. Her back was a map of cruelty. Long, faded scars from whips and belts, fresh bruises in sickening colors, and burned marks where hot metal had touched skin. Worst of all was the symbol burned deep into her shoulder blade, a jagged circle with the letter H inside. Eli stared at it. His hand shook. "What is that?" he whispered, voice raw like a wound. Clara closed her eyes. A long moment passed before she spoke. "It stands for hysteric. That's what he called me." She told him then, told him everything. Her real name was Anne-Marie Caldwell, a respected preacher's daughter from a nearby town called Prosperity. She was engaged once to a man she thought was good, a doctor named Alistair Finch. He was handsome, proud, kind in public, and monstrous in private. He ran a hospital for women, a place families sent their daughters, their wives, their sisters, if they were too emotional, too outspoken, too inconvenient. He called them patients. He treated them like livestock. Clara had discovered his secret. She confronted him with his own ledger filled with notes about experiments, failures, dead women. He smiled at her, she said, like a man admiring his own reflection. He had her taken. She remembered a dark room, the smell of smoke and metal, the sound of other women screaming, days that felt like a lifetime, nights that never ended. She escaped when a fire broke out. She didn't remember running. Only waking up alone in the snow with the dress he forced her to wear, marked forever to remind her of what she was. Eli listened, silent, furious, sick. He wiped her tears gently, not with pity, but with respect. He didn't speak of revenge that night. He knew she had lived too long with violence. What she needed now was someone who stayed. She slept. She healed. A life slowly grew between them in that winter cabin, a life she had never imagined having again. But peace is a fragile thing. 2 weeks after the fever broke, Eli noticed a thin trail of smoke rising from the ridge. Then, under the dying light of day, he saw 3 riders coming toward the cabin. They moved slow and sure, like men who already believed they owned the land they rode on. Clara saw them too, and though her face paled, she did not freeze this time. She looked at Eli with steady eyes. "They found me." Eli nodded. "Then we'll meet them." She grabbed her dress, not to wear it, but to burn it. They watched it turn to ash in the fire pit, the last symbol of her suffering consumed and carried away by the wind. When the riders stopped outside the cabin the next morning, Clara stood beside Eli on the porch, wearing his shirt and trousers. Her hair was tied back. Her hands were steady. Her fear had turned to fire. The man in the middle dismounted. Alistair Finch. He looked at Eli like he was a piece of furniture. He looked at Clara like she was a dog missing from his backyard. "Anne-Marie," he said with a chilling ease, "let's go home." Clara raised her chin. "My name is Clara, and I'm not going anywhere." What happened next happened fast. Guns drawn, words shouted. Eli's rifle cracked the silence. One of Finch's men hit the ground before he even hit the snow. Then another. A shot flew wild and grazed Eli's arm. Clara fired her pistol, steady, certain, and took down the man who once branded her. His body fell face first into the snow and didn't move again. Finch turned to run, a coward at last exposed. Clara chased him. Through the trees, over the frozen creek. She caught him at the stream. He begged. He lied. He tried to overpower her. And that's when Eli arrived. One shot. One echo. The monster fell. Clara stood in silence, while snowflakes settled over Alistair Finch's dead body. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply breathed. Slowly. Deeply. The way a person breathes when they've been underwater for too long. Together, she and Eli buried the past in a fire that burned all night. The sky glowed orange. The air smelled of smoke and freedom. Spring came. Green returned to the land. And so did Clara's laughter. She walked beside Eli down into town. People stared, whispered. She heard the word hysteric once, only once, and she smiled a little because she knew what that word really meant. A woman who refused to be broken. A survivor. A fighter. Weeks later, Clara stood on a hillside wearing a dress she had made herself, pale blue like a clear morning sky. She had planted flowers where Sarah Beckett rested, and something rare grew there now, a peace that had once felt impossible. Eli joined her. His hand found hers. "You're safe," he said. She looked out at the valley, sunlight warming her face, and whispered, "I'm free." And finally she believed it. She turned to him, her eyes calm, her voice full. "I'm ready to live, Eli. Not to hide, not to run, to live." Eli kissed her forehead. "Then let's live, together."